All right, thanks everyone for coming. It is now 2 minutes after, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a very full day. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jake Carlson. I'm the Director of Deep Blue Repository and Research Data Services at the University of Michigan. I'm here with Michaela Narlock, the Director of the Data Curation Network, and we're really excited that you've joined us today for our virtual learning series on sustaining open research. This is the first session of the series, and today we'll be focusing on funding agencies and the desirable characteristics. And I'm going to kick things off by providing a brief introduction to the subject. In August of 2022, the National Science and Technology Council released the Desirable Characteristics of Data Repositories for Federally Funded Research document. Its purpose, and I'm going to read directly from the document itself, is to improve consistency across federal departments and agencies in the instructions they provide to researchers about selecting repositories for data resulting from federally funded research. It identifies a set of desirable characteristics of online public access data repositories to help ensure that the research data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the FAIR principles, to the greatest extent possible, while integrating privacy, security, and other protections. The Desirable Characteristics document defines 14 characteristics and divides them into 3 broad categories. The first category, of which there are 5 characteristics, is organizational infrastructure, and this describes some of the planning, policies, and documentation requirements for the operation of a data repository. The next category is digital object management, which has 6 characteristics, which includes how data sets and their components are to be handled, described, and stewarded in a data repository. And then finally, the technology category, which has 3 characteristics, and they address the authentication, security, and sustainability aspects of operating a data repository. And so for repository managers and service providers, demonstrating that your repository meets these criteria is increasingly important. It's becoming the yardstick against which all data repositories are being measured and evaluated, not just by funding agencies, but by researchers themselves. And so not meeting these criteria means that a repository will not be recommended or included on lists of acceptable repositories for researchers to use in meeting data sharing requirements from funding agencies or publishers. And as we all know, the data repository landscape is uneven and incomplete across disciplines. And in the absence of widespread domain repositories, many academic libraries have stepped up to fill the gap by developing support services and institutional data repositories to meet the needs of researchers located at their host institution. Our institutional data repositories serve as critical infrastructure in enabling researchers to share their data, and therefore we need to ensure that our data services demonstrate an understanding of desirable characteristics and that we can demonstrate how we apply them effectively in our repositories. If we are unable to do this, we run the risk of being passed over and slipping into irrelevancy. And so today's virtual learning session is the first in a series in which we'll discuss the desirable characteristics and their impact on libraries, funding agencies, and open data more generally. And I'm really excited to hear from our 3 speakers today as they each bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in engaging with the desirable characteristics and developing structures for data sharing more broadly. After our 3 speakers have completed their presentations, we'll have some time for you to ask them questions, and we'll then invite you to participate in our breakout sessions, during which we'll dive deeper into the challenges of demonstrating alignment with the desirable characteristics. And finally, I want to put in the plug for our future sessions in this virtual learning series. They'll include sessions on data sharing readiness in academic institutions and in making the case for institutional repositories. More information on these sessions will be released in the next few weeks. And with that, I'm really happy to introduce our first speaker. Leighton Christiansen is a data curator at the National Transportation Library. He also serves as the U.S. Department of Transportation representative to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Subcommittee on Open Science. And in that role, Leighton was one of the nearly 50 federal employees who co-authored the desirable characteristics. Leighton will give a brief overview on the creation of the desirable characteristics, and then turn it over to in turn to discuss how they'll be used at the Department of Transportation and with contracted researchers to inform research data preservation practices. And so Leighton, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Jake. Really appreciate that very kind introduction. And it's a lot of responsibility and it's an honor to kick off this virtual learning series. So thank you for selecting me to wear the target in this case. But it's what I do because I'm a Fed. And in case you all were looking at the my profile picture on the website for this presentation, yes, I actually do have my tea mug has my orchid identifier in it, handmade by another librarian. You need to know a librarian who throws pottery. I highly recommend it. It's my favorite mug. All right, let's get started. Let's make sure everything's working. There we go. All right. So quick disclaimer and accessibility note. opinions expressed by me, and I promise I will tell you when there's an opinion. During the presentation, the discussion period, and other times during the session are mine alone and do not necessarily represent the opinions, practices, policies, and/or laws of the National Transportation Library, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Subcommittee on Open Science, or any other body of the U.S. government. Typographic errors are also mine. This presentation has been made as accessible as possible for persons with disabilities who use screen readers and adaptive technologies. So if you ask me for the slides and I share them with you, I've made them as accessible as possible. This includes adding alt text to images and checking for color choice and color contrast. The entire scripted text is included in the slide notes feature, so folks will be able to read along. However, my ad libs and my wanderings off of the script are not recorded in the slides. Sorry about that. And because the National Transportation Library is committed to making all of our presentations accessible to the widest possible audience, any suggested improvements are welcome. The slide note sections may also include text that I don't actually get a chance to read, but holds useful information. And I have created a handout version of the slide deck, which can be shared with you if that's easier for you as well. All right. Personal introduction, Leighton Christiansen, pronouns are they, them. There's the ORCID number, the things that are important. I'm the data curator at NTL, as Jake mentioned, and I lead our implementation team at DOT on public access, as well as the work I do on the subcommittee for open science. And I'm going to stop on this slide just long enough to say that as it happens, I was the lead author on the proposal for the research project that led Jake Carlson to be a co-author of the NCHRP Report 936, Guide to Ensuring Access to the Publications and Data of Federally Funded Transportation Research. And then I want to wish you all a happy year of open science. And with that, let's get to the heart of the matter. I'll talk about two main points: the development of the desirable characteristics document and how we're implementing that and plan to implement that at USDOT. Okay, a big thank you to Mariam Zaringhalam, the Assistant Director for Public Access and Research Policy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, for providing me the statistical slide content about the desirable characteristics that I'm going to share with you in the next couple of slides. So, where did the desirable characteristics come from? Well, they came from the Subcommittee on Open Science, or SOS, which is under the White House National Science and Technology Council, NSTC, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. Feds love acronyms. I'll do my best to make sure I explain all of them. The SOS exists to advance federal open science efforts, as well as to coordinate and harmonize public access and open science policy across federal agencies. Many of the outputs of the SOS are internal to the departments and the agencies to guide our own implementation. Others, such as the desirable characteristics of data repositories for federally funded research, are public documents made to fill specific needs expressed by the federally funded research community. The purpose, as Jake mentioned, of the desirable characteristics include improving consistency of repository selection guidance across federal agencies, promoting the fair data principles, incorporating the experiences and comments of agencies and public and private sector organizations, providing a high-level set of characteristics rather than an exhaustive set of design criteria for data repositories, allowing for implementation flexibility to vary across data repositories, and remaining nimble in the face of evolving technology and data sharing practices. We totally expect in the SOS that at some point in the next few years, we're going to have to do an update for the desirable characteristics because things keep moving. But right now, this is where we are. And then a note about point 5. These characteristics themselves are not a certification process, though they are aligned with certification schemes such as Cortra Seal. We do expect, as Jake alluded to, a great deal of motivation for repositories to demonstrate how they align to these criteria to make it easier for researchers, librarians, data curators, and other members of the research community to select those repositories. And I'm actually going to illustrate what that sort of alignment evaluation might look like on our own repository later in this presentation. So the SOS envisioned 3 broad audiences for these characteristics. Number 1, researchers, librarians, and data managers. The SOS hopes to assist federally funded researchers in selecting data repositories under our federal data management and sharing policies, which all look very different from one department to another. Second audience, program officers, funders, and policymakers. The SOS wants to help federal staff identify specific repositories that an agency might designate for use for a particular data type or subject type, and guide development of agency-supported data repositories, those that we build in-house. Data repositories and repository staff are the third audience, and the SOS wanted to help those repository staff understand the characteristics desired by an agency for sharing data resulting from federally funded research. Now, in order to get input from these audiences, which we're very interested in serving and aligning with, OSTP issued a request for comment in January 2020 to solicit feedback on the proposed set of characteristics. That feedback that was requested was on the proposed use and application of the desirable characteristics, the appropriateness of the characteristics for all data repositories, those 14 characteristics that Jake led off with in the introduction, as well as the characteristics defined in table 2 of the report, which are about repositories storing human data. Third, considerations for any other characteristics that might be included for unique data types, the ability of existing repositories to meet the desirable characteristics. We also want to hear from the public about the consistency of the desirable characteristics with other certification schemes and criteria, and then any other topics that we might have missed. I mean, we're only a handful of federal folks. We don't always have everything in front of us. We can't always think of everything. There were more than 11,000 views of that RFC between the time it was released in 2020 and yesterday when I was finishing my presentation. In 2020, we got 119 emailed responses into that RFC. The central image of this slide is a pie chart, which groups the 119 public responses into 9 segments, with academia, which had 38 responses and is shaded in dark blue, scientific societies, 22 responses shaded in dark green, and open access groups, 16 responses shaded in gold, being the top 3 categories of respondents and comprising 76 of the 119 responses, or 63%, if you like your math that way. They're filling out the rest of the pieces of the pie. We have national laboratories, federally funded research and development centers, and university affiliated research centers with 14 responses shaded in blue. Nonprofit organizations, 8 responses, light blue. Industry, 6 responses shaded that burnt orange. US government, 5 responses shaded gray. Publishers and publishing associations, only 2 responses, and that's the gray green, the small slice there. And individuals or people who didn't leave an affiliation, 8 responses, and that's shaded that pale yellow. The comments were then analyzed by the Science and Technology Policy Institute, STPI, or as we pronounce, because we like to pronounce acronyms, Stiffy, looking for agreement with the characteristics, common comments, concerns, areas for refinement or reorganization. So what did Stiffy find? Let's take a look at that. Stiffy's analysis showed overall agreement with the SOS approach and the need for a set of common characteristics. It did yield suggestions to reorganize the characteristics from how we had it in the draft and to clarify the language or the definitions describing those characteristics. It also surfaced some concerns that there may not be sufficient community standards around metadata or common and open data formats, as well as costs of implementing these characteristics without additional funding. And fourth, the analysis illuminated a desire for specifying best practices or policy prescriptions for repositories to meet these characteristics. Tell us exactly what to do and we will do it, is often what we hear as funders, as research funders. So the desirable characteristics were published in May of 2022, thanks to the work of more than 50 authors and collaborators and 18 or more departments, agencies, and offices. Again, the goals, to reiterate, improving consistency across federal departments, identifying characteristics for public access data repositories, making federal research as fair as possible, and protecting privacy and security. And the DOI on the screen there is provided by our folks, our friends at the Smithsonian Institution who also helped out. So thank you to the Smithsonian. All right. So I hope that gives you a good picture of the background of the desirable characteristics. If you have any questions, bring them up during discussion. Now I'm going to turn to implementation at DOT. But first, I'm going to introduce you to our repository and open science access portal, RosaP. And you'll notice open science is right there in the name. We did that on purpose. Since the signing of the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, or MAP 21 legislation in 2012, the National Transportation Library, NTL, has been mandated to serve as a central depository for research results and technical publications and provide a central clearinghouse for transportation data for the federal government. This is a big responsibility, and it's one that we're happy to fulfill. This MAP 21 mandate is specifically referenced in the current DOT Public Access Plan. The Public Access Plan requires that an electronic copy of all DOT-funded research be submitted to the NTL's digital repository, RosaP. And as of this month, RosaP hosts more than 66,000 records of research results, statistical reports, datasets, briefs, presentations, videos, maps, data management plans, and other formats, most of which are funded in whole or part by DOT. You can check us out at rosap.ntl.bts.gov, or you can use that handy DOI that I created for our repository. So now I'm going to open ourselves up to critique, and I'm going to let you know if NTL walks the desirable characteristic walk, or if we're all talk. And some of you on this call know that I do like to talk. So table 1, as Jake described, of the publication is called Desirable Characteristics of Repositories for Managing and Sharing Data Resulting from Federally Funded or Supported Research. Yes, it's a long title, it's a mouthful. The table has 3 sections: organizational infrastructure, digital object management, and technology. Each section has a number of characteristics and a short explanation or definition of that characteristic. I'm not going to define each of those characteristics. You can look at the document yourselves, but I am going to talk about each of those characteristics and then how we do at NTL in comparison to them. So the characteristics under organizational infrastructure are free and easy access, clear use guidance, risk management, retention policy, and long-term organizational sustainability. So how does RosaP do against those 5? Well, I believe that we can mostly check these off as complete. RosaP is free to use and no account is needed. Data sets are accompanied by as much documentation as researchers provide, and then is supplemented by NTL staff as needed. RosaP is not supposed to house sensitive data, publicly shareable data only. Our retention policy is 2 words: in perpetuity. And because we're optimists at NTL. And NTL is one of 5 national libraries. We were written into law by Congress in 1998. It would literally take an act of Congress to shut us down. So we have some long-term sustainability there. It's not 100% guaranteed, but we work with that as our goal, as in the back of our mind. Those who were paying attention notice that I phrase it as RosaP is not supposed to house sensitive data. Because we are a manual shop in a lot of ways, and we don't have, I haven't gone back to look at the data that was in the repository from before I started in 2016. I can't be 100% sure that we can make a strong claim on risk management. And it's one of the things that I would really like to be able to do at some point, is make sure that we don't have anything sensitive there by accident. Next, let's talk about digital object management. The characteristics for this part of the table are unique persistent identifiers, metadata, curation and quality assurance, broad and measured reuse, common formats, and provenance. How does NTL do here? Very strongly. Data sets are assigned DOIs when they're cataloged, and our public access policy requires researchers have ORCIDs. Getting them to implement that and get their ORCIDs registered is another issue, but we do require it. We use Dublin Core bibliographic metadata and DCAT US version 1, what used to be known as Project Open Data Metadata. I hope you all are making your comments on DCAT version 3, which is going to be an update, so that data can be found in data.gov. We have 1 Fed and 2 fellows on staff with specific data curation training as part of their Masters of Library and Information Science studies. And we are working The Data Curation Network curated workflow into our work process to begin on October 1, 2023. And Michaela and Jake did not know that before they invited me. So to do this presentation, there's no quid pro quo here, but we are going to make it part of our workflow. We're testing it now over the summer. All DOT produced data is in the public domain, and we encourage researchers to get Creative Commons or appropriate licenses on their end as well. And the rights statements are called out specifically in our metadata. We push for submission of open format and documentation if there has to be a proprietary format. And in transportation, there's a lot of road sensors and other things that are made by industry that have very proprietary formats, which we have to push back against. Documentation includes version control, and we will improve our provenance tracking when we are fully using the curated workflow, and I'm super excited for that. All right, third part of table 1 is technology. With these characteristics: authentication, long-term technical sustainability, and security and integrity. Well, how does NTL rate here? Like I said, we're still a very manual shop, and we lack some documentation. So we lack some software, we lack some documentation about our work processes, and we need to address both of those before we go for our Core Trust Seal certification later this year or early next year. Right now, all submissions are mediated by humans. We do employ 3-2-1 backup strategies, and we expect to be around for a while. We're written into law, but we could use more explicit and documented emergency recovery plans, which we don't have, sadly, which is why we get a tilde there instead of a check mark. And the data in RosaP, again, is not supposed to be sensitive, but it would be nice to be able to check that out. DOT does have a secure data commons for more sensitive data, and we need to see what should be there rather than in RosaP. Now, remember what I mentioned before, that, and what Jake mentioned before, the desirable characteristics is not a certification scheme. However, they can certainly help prioritize areas for improvement at repositories. And you'll see in the last 3 slides, I believe I have identified a number of areas for improvement, and you can email me directly if you think I missed anything, and I'm glad to have that conversation. So what about table 2? I'm just going to breeze over table 2 real quick. Table 2 is entitled Additional Considerations for Repositories Storing Human Data, and has these characteristics: fidelity to consent, security, limited use compliant, download control, request review, plan for breach, and accountability. Now, I didn't include all those definitions. You'll have to look them up in the document. And I didn't score RosaP against these characteristics because RosaP is not designed to house secure data and share sensitive human subject data. We're not NIH. That's not our job. DOT protects and provides data with human subjects through other means, through other access points. What we may need to do at DOT, to be honest, is take a look at our other access points through the desirable characteristics lens and see where we need to make improvements to those systems. So now I'm going to bring it all home by showing how DOT is helping and or planning to help our researchers implement the desirable characteristics. So when the DOT Public Access Plan went into effect on January 1, 2016, we also stood up a guidance website to help researchers implement the plan. One of those pages is our guidelines for evaluating repositories for conformance with the DOT Public Access Plan. It's one of the pages I refer researchers to all the time when I go out and do trainings to the DOT-funded research community. The characteristics that we suggest researchers look for in a repository were based on the data seal of approval at the time. We know that's a little outdated because data seal of approval is now Core Trust Seal. And now we have the desirable characteristics. So this page needs to get updated to match the SOS desirable characteristics soonish. And then one of the other things that our public access plan promised was that we, and that means NTL, would keep a list of data repositories conformant with the DOT Public Access Plan. And we have done so since 2016. Repositories are suggested by NTL staff or by researchers. And if the repository is willing to be included in that list, the repository either provides proof of their data seal of approval, their Core Trust Seal, or their other certification, or I send them a questionnaire to fill out, and the questions are based on the 10 criteria of the old data seal of approval. NTL staff then reviews each questionnaire and adds the repository to the list if we're satisfied with the answers. You don't have to be 100%. You don't have to be like the best repository on the planet, but you have to be working toward those criteria. And so far, we haven't rejected anybody. We include everybody on the list. But that questionnaire now needs to change to reflect the desirable characteristics, and we'll do so soonish. So why am I hedging, and why make all of these changes to our guidance documents? Well, that's because our public access plan is undergoing review and update to satisfy the August 2022 OSTP memo that Jake mentioned, ensuring free, immediate, and equitable access to federally funded research. Section 3.B3 of that memo says, federal agencies should also provide guidance to researchers that ensure the digital repositories used align to the extent practicable with the National Science and Technology Council document entitled Desirable Characteristics of Data Repositories for Federally Funded Research. So it's called out specifically in the memo. The DOT draft update also specifically names the desirable characteristics, and now our guidance needs to be updated to align as well. There was one last question I was asked to address, and then I'm going to pass the mic. Just a little question about funding. The plan to increase public access to the results of federally funded scientific research version 1.1, or what we refer to as the DOT Public Access Plan, went live on December 15, 2015, and went into effect on the 1st of January, 2016. Section 4.2, data, very plainly states, the DOT will allow the inclusion of appropriate costs for data management and access in proposals for federal funding for scientific research. And if you want to read it yourself, you can check out our landing page there at the DOIs on the screen. Our first plan, that plan, recognized the importance of research outputs, publication, data, and others to maintaining and improving our transportation access, equity, safety, and infrastructure. Further, the plan endorses the tax-paying public's right to access the research that they funded. Our updated plan will continue along those lines. The same sort of language will be there. And like all federal agencies, we need to have our DOT public access plan updated and completed by December 31, 2024. The draft update, I can't share it with you, but it has almost the exact same funding language as I read previously. But researchers still have to include the expense request in their proposal. I don't have the stats on that. I know anecdotally, it is a vanishingly small percentage of researchers who have remembered to ask for data preservation expenses. It's probably close to zero. Soapbox time. This is an opinion. Here it comes. The most likely person or organization to reuse your data first is you and your team. So be good to your future self. Make sure you can find your data. Put it in a repository that aligns closely with the desirable characteristics. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for your time and attention, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the mic.
All right, Leighton, thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation and a lot for us to think about. But we have two more speakers here who are also going to give us a lot to think about, and I want to be sure that they have a time to speak. So we're going to hold our questions until the end of the session, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our second speaker. Peter Arbuckle is the Branch Chief Scientific Data Management with the National Agricultural Library. He will share the National Agricultural Library's approach to supporting the USDA's federal public access requirements for digital scientific data, which is grounded in aligning policy, customer requirements, and best management practices to deliver useful data curation services. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Jake. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
All right, great. I'm going to share a little bit today with you about our experience at the National Agricultural Library supporting public access for USDA's digital scientific data requirements. My presentation is going to be kind of share our experience over the years. We've been doing this for about a decade, and as Leighton mentioned, things have are consistently changing, and they have been changing quickly over the last 10 years. And so we're doing our best to adapt and structure ourselves so that we can adapt. And so in an overview, I'm going to give a little bit of information about our organization. I think it's informative about how we approach public access, and then also the policy that are our major drivers, which is the USDA Departmental Regulation 1020-006, and then our implementation, which some of you might know is the Ag Data Commons. And then where we'll get into the desirable characteristics is that this is really, our implementation of Ag Data Commons is a combination, or I don't know if calling it a dance is the thing, but basically trying to align policy, customer requirements, and best management practices, including the desirable characteristics. I always like to start with a slide about the National Agricultural Library, because a lot of folks don't know that we exist, but the USDA itself was established in 1862 with the mission to acquire and diffuse among the people of the United States useful information on subjects connected with agriculture and rural development. And that is the foundational mission of the department, and it's also the mission of the library. And we are organized under USDA's Research, Education, and Economics Mission Area, which houses the Agricultural Research Service, the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, the Economic Research Service, and the National Agricultural Statistics Service. NAL itself is organized underneath the Agricultural Research Service. And while we serve the entire department, the department's huge. Our budget's $490 billion spread across 22 different agencies. Our data programs primarily serve REE mission area right now, particularly ARS and NIFA, and with a combined research budget of a little bit over $3 billion. And that's really only because we're just getting started. And we see our programs now. I mean, as an organization that's been around for 160 years, we see our programs now, even though we've been around for a decade, that's still just the beginning. We're still in early days. And so as we support the Agricultural Research Service and NIFA and the REE agencies, there are many other agencies that perform intramural and extramural research in USDA, and we will continue to expand as we build our programs. So our major policy driver, as I mentioned, is the USDA Departmental Regulation 1020-006. And it was designed to implement the requirements of the 2014 Holdren memo, the OSTP memo, increasing access to the results of federally funded research. And the scope of the departmental regulation is that all peer-reviewed scholarly publications and digital scientific research data assets arising from unclassified research and program funded wholly or in part by USDA must be made accessible to the public to the fullest extent practicable. It requires that publications covered by the policy be made freely accessible through USDA's Public Access Archive System, PubAg. All scientific research that is expected to produce digital scientific research data assets must be accompanied by a reviewed and approved data management plan. And lastly, digital scientific research data assets covered by public access requirements must be published by a reputable data repository in a standardized metadata catalog entry that describes the digital scientific research data asset must be submitted to the publicly available scientific data catalog, Ag Data Commons. The DR also specifies that authors of pubs and data must use ORC-IDs. Let's see, more recently, OSTP released another memo in August of 2022, the Nelson memo called Ensuring Free, Immediate, and Equitable Access to Federally Funded Research, as Leighton and Jake referenced. For us, the scope remains the same. It builds on the Holdren memo, but from our perspective, with an emphasis on persistent IDs for awards, researchers, and protocols. The new requirements are that it requires that publications be made publicly accessible via PubAg without embargo. And on the surface, not much has changed with respect to the data requirements. However, with an increased consideration of persistent identifiers in metadata, it influences our metadata and digital workflows. And so under the surface, there are nuances that will affect our operation. But what really underlies these requirements is this is with the persistent identifiers for awards, researchers, and protocols is really a desire to improve our ability to track and report impacts of USDA's research investment. And so we're going to be modifying the departmental regulation with respect to some of these changes in the new requirements of the OSDP memo in the coming year, I believe. And so in response to the Holdren memo years ago, NAL launched PubAg, which I mentioned is our publication archive system, which is the system. You can find it at pubag.nal.usda.gov, and it's the system we're developing to support both intramural and extramural access to research publications. And Ag Data Commons is our implementation to support the requirements for public access to digital scientific research data. And Ag Data Commons can be found at data.nal.usda.gov, and it's our generalist repository for digital scientific data. We think about Ag Data Commons for the services it provides rather than as a product or an application. We find that decomposing it by functions or services allows us to take a requirements-driven management approach and really dial in on exactly what value we're providing and to whom. And this really informs how we develop and invest in the application or in the service. You can see we view three main services that are conferred by Ag Data Commons. There's the catalog services support, which support compliance with open data policy and helping folks publish to data.gov. It also provides the mechanism for researchers to comply with our public access, with our departmental regulation. And it also facilitates cross-domain discovery of agricultural research data. The repository clearly supports public access, storage and preservation for public access and DOI minting. And I'll also have the little note here that we are working on preservation. We don't have a system in place right now, but we've started making progress and we've committed some funding to starting to develop a digital preservation system at NAL. What I want to emphasize in this slide is on the right side what we say call value-added services, and these are our data curation services. And we envision, or we see the data curation as the backbone of what we do. It's really how we support the research community to add value to the data and to make it, as we know, make it fair. And so our data curation services focus on organizing and documenting data and metadata to increase fairness, but also to support the digital workflows and the microservices for ingest and egress, and for supporting automated discovery and facilitating analysis and integration. And so as we grow, it's really going to be the data curation capacity where we invest with technical investment in support. And to that end, we're currently migrating our custom application that we've developed over the last 10 years for Ag Data Commons to support Ag Data Commons, our catalog and repository application. from our homegrown application to software as a service. And we feel that this is going to help us, I won't say de-emphasize the technology, but emphasize the curation services and really allow us to invest more in data curation and the services that confers. You know, when we started out with the Ag Data Commons, there weren't a lot of solutions available which met our requirements for scientific research data management. And so in developing our own system, it really required us to take a product forward approach that required a lot of investment and energy put into IT. And but in the last 10 years, a lot has changed. The landscape's changed in terms of community maturity, best management practices like the desirable characteristics, and frankly, our internal IT landscape has changed too. And so we really are excited that a move to software as a service will free up resources and space to develop our curation program. And we'll get more into the software as a service in a minute. And so, you know, our journey has been just that, we launched in, or, you know, initiated our services in 2012, and we launched the Ag Data Commons catalog and repository in 2014. And as we've gone, just like everybody else, we've been coming up to speed on best management practices and participating in developing those. In 2016, we all know the Wilkinson paper laid the framework for FAIR. Between 2017 and 2019, we began looking more closely at the OIS reference model, looking at the trustworthy repositories audit and certification, and did, you know, internal track audits, and also I guess did an internal kind of core trust seal evaluation to figure out what it would take to become core trust seal certified. And of course, we're talking here about the desirable characteristics, which were developed or released in 2022. Two of our team members participated along with Leighton in that development. That's Nino Cenkeli and Aaron Antonioli. And so the point is that these best management practices have been evolving over time and maturing over time, and have really helped us get to the place where it's helped us, one, gain more clarity on our requirements, but then also help us evaluate the technology that we wanted to implement to support the public access requirements. I also want to share what I mentioned about being embedded with the Agricultural Research Service. We have a really close connection with our research communities within the Agricultural Research Service that really allows us to monitor customer needs. And this is a big part of our culture, is to focus on let customer requirements drive our investments. And we give a lot of training and outreach to help and support with tools and services to specific communities, in an effort clearly to train and provide information, but also it helps us collect requirements. And so we've been doing this and increasing those connections over the last 10 years with the Agricultural Research Service. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've been working more closely with NIFA to build capacity for public access for extramural research, and providing support services for publications and data through PubAg and Ag Data Commons. NIFA's in the last 2 or 3 years with our collaboration has been primarily focused on publications. That's, a big challenge for them is tracking and reporting publications, and at this point less so data, of course, because it's much more nascent. But we're going to continue to work with NIFA on developing capacity for collecting or providing access to extramural research data as well. And the monitoring and reporting, I mentioned that, a big thrust of our implementation plan for public access is focused on monitoring and reporting. This is a big challenge for NIFA too, as you can imagine, with, over $1 billion of research money spread throughout the country, thousands of researchers, and so that's a big area where we're trying to work with NIFA to kind of figure out how to monitor public access compliance. And I've noted these other USDA agencies at the bottom for the purpose of what I mentioned earlier, is that there are a number, and this is not an exhaustive list, but there's a number of USDA agencies that have both intramural and extramural research funding. Forest Service is one of them, APHIS, Food and Nutrition Service, Agricultural Marketing Services, strictly extramural. They have block grants, and NRCS. And these are organizations where we don't have really close connections with right now. We support Forest Service, and we've collaborated with Forest Service for years, but some of these other agencies we're just now starting to engage with, or we've engaged with them over the last couple of years, particularly in the development of the departmental regulation. But in terms of implementation, we're still in very early days with figuring out how to support the agencies that aren't specifically dedicated to research and development. And so, as I mentioned, the culmination of our policies and procedures at USDA, our emphasis on customer requirements and the best management practices that have been evolving in the field, including and maybe particularly the desirable characteristics, led us to, we took I believe it was a 10 or so month process to do a decision analysis resolution analysis to evaluate alternatives, alternative solutions for our homegrown catalog and repository that supports Ag Data Commons. And we made the decision, like I said earlier, in creating a homegrown solution, we spent more time on IT than program. And so we made the decision a couple of years ago to start the process of evaluating a software as a service solution, basically to, one, for us, outsource the IT support, but also the community has matured to the point where there are solutions out there where the best management practices are embedded, and rather than develop and implement those ourselves, we now are in the position where we can buy them for the most part. And so we chose Figshare because we felt like they had the embedded BMPs we were looking for. It met most of our functional requirements, and critically, were able to meet our federal technical and security requirements. Something that was also really important to us was the emerging community of federal users. They have customers with Department of Homeland Security, EPA, Smithsonian, and they participated in NIH's Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative. And that was very important to us, to see a platform that also had other federal customers. And so the desirable characteristics were really useful in evaluating our technology, our software as a service support solutions. And Figshare, we found that, or this citation here is a self-reported article by Figshare, but we also found that Figshare, as I said, met most of our requirements and met our requirements for embedded best management practices. You can see here that there's three criteria where Figshare doesn't fully meet the desirable characteristics. But as I mentioned earlier, NAL, we see curation as a critical part of our program, and we're building our Figshare implementation so that we can build in our curation processes into the workflow. And then two, in terms of confidentiality, we're only accepting open data. We're not accepting personally identifiable information, and there will be no embargo period on data. And so we found that Figshare met pretty much all of the requirements and the elements of the desirable characteristics. There is the common format criteria that is still a work in progress, and we're still evaluating how we're going to approach that. But for the most part, we're happy that what we're doing is consistent with best practices, especially with the desirable characteristics. So in summary, NAL supporting the public access requirements for USDA funded research community. Right now, we focus on ARS and NIFA. We're trying to do that with best practices in mind, but we have a long way to go in terms of implementing, developing policies, more complete set of policies throughout the agency, but also implementation policies, things like what do we do with contracts and data generated in contracts and cooperative agreements. We have a lot of work to do in modifying those legal documents or legal instruments that govern those financial relationships. And we really see that our implementation will continuously evolve. And our approach is to organize ourselves around services rather than products, because that allows us to evolve as tools come and go. As long as we internally have a handle on policies, customer requirements, best management practices, and our IT policies and procedures, it puts us in a position as a team to address change as it comes. And this environment is constantly changing and will continue to change. The technology is going to continue to change and probably even change faster in the future. And so this is kind of the core of our business, is really trying to position ourselves to accommodate that change and adapt to the change. And with that, I will turn the mic back over to Jay.
Great, thank you, Peter. I know we're running a little behind schedule, so I want to quickly introduce Ashley and get her started. Ashley Farley is a program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In her presentation, she'll provide the experience at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in envisioning a data access program to help program staff and their grantees better share data, and how this approach aligns with the desirable characteristics framework. This work has been driven by a FAIR data working group coordinating across all foundation divisions. Ashley's presentation will include a description of this working group and discussion around what the easiest successes have been, as well as what has been their biggest obstacles. Go ahead, Ashley.
Hello, am I back?
You are back.
I've never had Zoom crash on me like that before. Okay, let's see. I'm so sorry. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Ashley, we just lost your screen.
We just lost Ashley.
I see her.
I just came back. I'm sorry. I have not had this issue before. Okay.
That was perfect timing.
I know. I don't know what it is. Okay. I'm starting this back up, and I promise we'll go through this as efficiently as possible. So I'm Ashley Farley. I'm Program Officer of Knowledge and Research Services at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm a librarian by background and degree who's now starting to dabble more in data, which has been really exciting. And I've already learned so much today and see all the areas that we need to improve in. So from a foundation perspective, and these numbers are sadly a bit outdated, since, this was pre-COVID, but, we're almost to the point of spending about $7 billion per year on grants, but I just kind of wanted to show the snapshot of how we kind of work globally, the number of grants that we give per year, around over 2,100, and it continues to grow. Our grantees, we have, over 41 programs, data strategies at this point. So it's a lot of effort to try and coordinate, policies and procedures across all of our different programs. Some programs are, I think, much more developed than others and have, more of their budget to be able to really focus on data sharing and data management as part of that investment. And in seeing the chat along the way, I wanted to mention too that I often forget this myself, that the Gates Foundation is not meant to exist in perpetuity. There's actually a sunset clause that once the last co-chair passes, the foundation is supposed to wrap up and cease to exist within a decade. And so I try to bring that up more in the internal conversations we have as to whether we should be data stewards or help others externally be data stewards and care about the provenance of our data. So just kind of an overview of the data types at the foundation. So the way that we think of it, we think very much kind of internal data, external data, which, operational data is all of our kind of grant making and internal financial data that we use to make decisions. And then programmatic is more of the external, or the data that, we think would be valuable to other communities to be able to use and have further impact on the work that we fund. And then kind of thinking through like a data flow of, what are we generating through our grants ourselves? What are we acquiring or bringing in? What have we funded, or what also have we influenced? And then, of course, there's the topic of sensitive data, which we spend a lot of time considering and thinking through, which I think is really important, but I also think in other sentences, it's really stymied us from being able to experiment or try to do something to improve data access and how we help our grantees share and manage data. So here's kind of where we've been. I like these next couple of slides, and similarly to Leighton, my slides have a ton of information on them that I won't cover, but happy to share and, go back. But when I try to kind of convey, what the current state of kind of data use or discovery at the foundation, this is kind of at the pre-grant. So where, our program officers, are looking to make data-informed decisions and decisions that are aligned with their strategy needs. They're looking for data to help them decide, who to fund. We as a private funder do not typically issue like traditional RFPs, or we're not getting kind of organic submissions to find who to fund and who to do the work. It's often the work of the program officer to discover that, and it's through reading papers, data sharing, partnerships, conferences, things like that, that those kind of connections are made. But oftentimes trying to find that data and access to that data is an arduous process, and there's a lot of back and forth. I mean, I feel so much of this that we do is a lot of, emails and messages and waiting and things that really, really slow down the process. And can lead to making, poor funding decisions, or can lead to kind of funding duplication or waste. And I think it's important that we really try to solve for that. And it also happens kind of on the post-grant side as well. So, we've given the grant, the work has been done, and then we want to follow up. And oftentimes, there's, I think, a big shift at the foundation that we're using data to be able to make our next decisions, or we're shifting more to using modeling data ourselves to be able to make advancements and to change our strategy. But oftentimes, we funded the work, we've worked with the grantee, and we can't even get the data back ourselves, let alone, help them make the data available, living up to our like open access and underlying data sharing policies. It's been, quite hard, and we have kind of an ideal where we should be able to easily track this information, have data management and sharing plans, which is something that we've been piloting. We do not have a a strong data sharing policy, which has been kind of a dream of mine to work towards. Right now, we have, a global access clause, which, data is meant to be a part of, but it's not very prescriptive, and we don't offer a lot of supports to make that data sharing happen. So we would like to make it more standard across all of our grant making activities that these things are required, but it's been kind of an uphill battle to get to that point. So we envision a point where, it's much more seamless, and you'll see we love acronyms as well here. Shows GDX in this graphic stands for the Gates Data Exchange, which I will talk about in more detail later. And I think, so I like this graphic a lot. So we've spent a lot of time since 2017, which we call the Fair Data Working Group, which really started as a small group to try and better live up to our underlying data sharing requirements for the open access policy. But once we got all the program officers in a room, some of the first statements were like, yeah, we should improve that, but like, that's too late. Like, we want data sooner. We want it to be more comprehensive, not just tied to the publication. And so the scope quickly grew to include just, data at the time of the, it's generated or the grant is closed. And so across all of our divisions, we really saw a lot of these as our major kind of friction points. And while there won't be a solution to solve them all, I do think there's a lot of overlap and solutions that, can work for, say, our agriculture team, will also work in global health and even like our US educational programs. And a lot of it does come down to political, motivational, and I think we can solve for the technical and economic most easily, and where we see kind of the biggest obstacles are often in legal and ethical. So again, around that sensitive data sharing and solving for that, and kind of who is the data ownership and the governance structures. And this I like just to have in here, and I think we've had some really interesting quotes from a lot of our program officers, and we've kind of been putting these into different buckets for what we would like to see as solutions. And I include this one because I think it's important to see kind of the external data ecosystem. So this is where I think we are kind of the weakest at this point, is being able to learn. So, going through the desirable characteristics, I'm like, this is something that we should be more aware of and are integrating into our work. And I think we've been operating a bit in a silo. The foundation, we have a propensity to want to kind of, build things from scratch or, reinvent the wheel. And we need to do a better job, I think, of engaging externally. And there are some program teams that are much more adept at that than others. But I think, there's a big opportunity for us to be able to engage externally and leverage what expertise has been done. Personally, from being on the open access team, I wish we worked a lot more closely with libraries, and I think that's important. And in the kind of data management and sharing and working with the plans and working with grantees, I've been trying to kind of have a two-tiered system of like, helping them helping grantees navigate which resources they already have available to them, especially through their institution or library connections, and make sure that they're aware of that before we, I think, as a foundation, would step in and say, here's, guidance and services that we can provide, because I think that's a better way to have that done. So speaking of the Gates Data Exchange, so in 2018, in the spirit of kind of building things from scratch, we weren't really sure where a lot of our data may be. We wanted to, there was definitely concerns around security and access and wanting to control that to begin with. And so we had a team that just kind of started to build, it's a CCAN repository, to house a lot of our data that program staff are using or grantees are generating. So I took a look at the list of desirable characteristics and to see how Gates Data Exchange compares. And it's not great. It's not great. But I think we've been aware of that, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to take some time to consider these characteristics, how other external repositories meet those needs more effectively, and how we can pivot. So I think it's a time when we realize that it's not the best role for us to kind of build this internally. For one thing, it's not open access or easily accessible. There's a lot of kind of metadata and persistent identifiers that are, there's some, but they're not comprehensive. And again, we don't have, we're not going to exist in perpetuity. There's kind of no backup plan for accessibility long-term. And we also, at this point, legal doesn't want us to bring in any sensitive data at all, no, storing of human data. And so that's been a big issue that we're trying to resolve, because we do have a lot of program staff who are modelers and looking at large data sets and wanting to combine them in different ways and have that kind of information, and synthetic data will only get us so far. So we're trying to solve for those and make sure that we have the protections that are necessary. And then I wanted to mention Gates Open Research. So this is a fully open post-peer-reviewed platform that we partner with F1000, and we've been relying heavily on their recommendations for repositories. And while we were having these presentations, it made me realize that I should check in with them and see if they are, one, aware of the desirable characteristics, and two, if they've used any similar frameworks or will use it to be able to assess what should be on this list. Of course, it's not comprehensive, and I think it too kind of lacks a ability to help authors check in with their institutions first to see if there are institutional repositories that would be better for them to store their data. We've kind of the ones that have been mentioned already, and we are big supporters of especially Zenodo, but I think we're getting to a point too where we're thinking about how we can better participate and help support the infrastructure of these groups. So yeah, right now we do share with our grantees. It's a pretty, I think, a useful data sharing guidance on Gates Open Research. But again, it's just kind of, guidance on paper, and we're definitely seeing that grantees and program staff need more supports to be able to manage and share data. So this is kind of what we're looking at as a solution. So after several years of kind of mapping out the issues and having internal conversations, we've kind of broken it down into, what we could do at an enterprise, so a foundation-wide level, and then what might be more division specific. So that'll get into, what's needed for specific types of data or data governance, and what can be done again at an enterprise level. And what I'm really interested in, would love to get into more, is our data systems and the guidance and support. So right now we do allow grantees to consider these kind of costs, but I don't think we're having enough conversations to help grantees think through this. And I also think it's hard to do this at an individual grant level. And I don't think the burden should necessarily be on program staff and grantees to continue to be vetting, vendors and partners and services. And my goal is to have, an actual team that does that instead. So then each, grantee can tap into any of the services that we may need, because it's hard, I think, to budget for and predict, especially if these are a 3-year grant. Smaller grants, we have seen that it's a struggle for anyone to kind of assess the appropriate amount of funding that's needed to manage the data. And so we're having to go back at the end of grants and being asked to, hey, it's going to be another $20,000 to curate and store this data. And we would like to be, I think, much more proactive in providing those services. So it's kind of we're calling this, we want to be able to treat data as an asset. I think it's an important shift for us in the foundation, and how we are thinking of, funding and supporting, and kind of how we message the importance of data. And I think the desirable characteristics definitely tie into number 6 on this list. So we're, learning how to help or teaching our grantees and working with them to help find and trusted repositories to preserve their data in. Yeah, and I think number 3, the designing grants is something that we've been working on, and it's hard to kind of see, we've spent the last 3 years really building this up in a lot of different grants and projects, but then it takes time to have that work to be done and generated. So we haven't kind of come back around for some of these pilots to see, what data generated, how it looked like. Did they follow the data management and sharing plans? Was the data put in the repository? We have some of our COVID work has been oddly enough, a silver lining in the pandemic has been one of the strongest use cases and examples that we've been able to look through. And it's amazing to see that we had, finally, we didn't get very much pushback that we usually did for putting in data sharing requirements. Everyone was like, okay, we're gonna need to collaborate on this and share the data, and important to solve this pandemic. And we know, of course, there are many other problems that we are trying to solve in the world. And so we thought that was kind of a frictionless example, but we're still at the point of having trouble even when we set up repositories and relationships to share that data. For some reason, we are still running up against obstacles of the data just not being shared, and we have limited, levers to pull to make that happen post-grant. So yeah, so really what we've learned, and we're trying to do this at scale, is we need a lot more guidance and supports, and I think to have all of that available to make it for programs, make it as easy possible for grantees and program staff to ensure to unlock that data, and really pushing, especially our leadership, to have more of a mindset that this is a public good, and that data does need to be as open as possible. And then, of course, driving that at scale internally is always a lot of fun, and there's a lot of politics. And yeah, so we're looking for trying to build from next year on a dedicated team that has a robust budget to be able to both support internally and externally the work, and to better align with, say, our legal teams, our communications, voice, and from our leadership, I think is important as well, because we need to signal that this is how we are now working as a foundation, so it's easier for our partners and grantees to align with our values and goals there. Okay, and I will stop.
Great, thank you, Ashley. This was a great set of presentations. We are running a little bit late, and so we're going to take some time to do the questions and answers, but we had an activity planned that we're probably not going to have time to do, unfortunately. So now I want to open it up for questions and answers. I'm going to kick it over to Michaela to run that. And as a reminder, we are recording this session. So if you don't want your voice to be recorded, please do put your question in the chat and Michaela will get it. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to start with one for you, Ashley, from Lisa Chin. Are decisions about funding made with the described data limitations accounted for? For example, do grant managers evaluate data management as a part of the funding? What happens when a grantee wants to collect data that may not be sustainable by the BMGF?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think well, of course, with everything, it really depends on the project and what the foundation is funding it for and the outcomes that they're looking for. I think we are getting to a point where grant managers are better evaluating data management as part of that and requiring it. I think the weakest point is often the follow-up and the follow through. And I sadly have seen too many examples too where, since we don't have a data access policy, and these are being, we have data access clauses that are being negotiated at a per grant level with the grantees. Oftentimes, if there's like too much back and forth, or there's not an alignment between like our legal team and perspective and the grantees, and this is especially true for like large organizations that we are funding and working with, the data sharing is often, sadly, especially data sharing externally, is the first thing that gets dropped. So it's, if it's not, I think, core to what the grant maker is wanting as an outcome of the grant, they'll settle for like, okay, the foundation will get limited access to the data, the grantee will have the data, and we'll move forward with that. And I think, if it happens when the grantee wants to collect data that may not be sustainable, I mean, I think that's kind of the status quo right now. Like, we don't typically bring in a lot of data and house it ourselves. So trying to get have a stronger muscle of making recommendations that they work with their institutions or the repositories to store the data. But sadly, I believe probably most of it is living on servers and getting lost in the file drawers.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. If anyone has a follow-up to that, feel free to put it in chat. Now I'm going to ask a question to all three of you, and then Peter, I've got a couple for you after this question. So we'll start with Leighton. Is there interest in providing capacity to do data analysis or aggregation within the systems your agencies provide?
Sure, of course there is. And it depends on the office. At the Department of Transportation, there are 9 different modes of transportation: highway, pipeline, water, so any way you can think about getting around and moving people and goods. And they all have their own budgets, and they all have their own people, and they have their own audiences who have been using their data for decades and who have different expectations. So besides RosaP, which is our archive, our repository, we also have the BTS data catalog, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, which is my home office at DOT, where it's built on the Socrata platform, which is now Tyler or something else. These things get sold and bought all the time. And in that, we put up data sets, and people can go and do visualizations and analysis and make pretty pictures that convince executives of things they probably shouldn't be convinced of. Oh, that was an opinion. Sorry, I forgot to say that beforehand. Yes, but it's also, it takes a level of resources. It takes people, it takes software, it takes money. Hello. Back to the Obama administration, do this within your existing budgets. That is not taking data seriously. So anyway, I got lots of opinions and all of that, but it really depends. It's really up in the air, Michaela. I can't give you a single answer, and it depends on, who you are and where you are in the science and how much of a budget you get. Sure, at DOT, we spend $1 billion on research every year. That doesn't mean anybody's necessarily thinking about building the fun toys, right? It's just more getting the research out, and hopefully we're making good decisions based on it.
Thanks, Leighton. No, thank you. Peter, same question to you, which I can repeat if you would like.
This is the one you put in the chat about.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So, when we started out with Ag Data Commons, whenever you start 10 years ago, you start things, you have big grandiose visions, and so the idea people wanted, data visualization and integration. And, when you get into it, it's really, really hard, and it's really expensive, and it's really difficult to do for generalized use cases. And so that's where we've evolved, and ARS has actually is building capacity in a group called our Partnerships for Data Innovations, where the Agricultural Research Service has a group specifically that works with specific groups of scientists to build those types of analytical tools. In our role, we've basically delineated our role is that we focus on the cataloging, repository, and data curation service, preparing data that for others to use it, like in those types of applications. And so we've kind of set the boundary for our business to not include that work.
Thanks. And Ashley, just to read the question off one more time for the recording, is there interest in providing capacity to do data analysis or aggregation within the systems your agency provides?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think eventually, yes. But one example I was thinking of is so we one of our biggest investments have been in the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the IHME, here in Seattle. That's through partnership with the University of Washington, and that's a really robust global health data set, and we fund it and have trouble accessing it ourselves for some of our needs. And they kind of, I think the foundation has always had and I think this needs to shift, an odd kind of hands-off approach we give the money, we grant the money, but we don't want to be heavy-handed in a lot of the, what happens after that point. And we structured it, as long as we see that the, deliverables and milestones have been met for that project, we consider it good. And I think that's shifting a lot, because now, the example of IHME is they have kind of developed their own business model for access to that data that doesn't necessarily align with a lot of our global access or open access goals. And then there's, we feel like we're in a spot where there's little that we can do about that. So I would say that our systems aren't robust enough to be able to really manage that. And then again, too, it comes down to money.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's so many other threads I want to pull on from this conversation, but I know we're already running low on time. So Peter, I've got a couple of questions for you in the USDA NAL. Was the main reason for going with Figshare because it's hosted and maintained by them, not in-house? And a follow-up, are you concerned that Figshare does not support highly structured data at this time?
So the first question, I wouldn't say it's the main reason, but it was certainly part of it. It was certainly a significant part of it. And like I said, I think our perspective was that, when we started the Ag Data Commons, we didn't see a lot of structured, like I said, the best management practices, it was early days on best management practices, and a lot's evolved since then. And so there weren't a lot of choices at the time. And so now there are more choices, and so, yeah, the operational and also the operational component is significant, but also just in terms of where we want to take our business, it made sense to look for an off-the-shelf solution to the extent possible. And to your second question. The answer is, that's something that that we considered and we're paying attention to. I think we're I tried to paint the picture that we take an evolutionary approach to things, and we hope that will evolve and improve, and if it becomes a major requirement, then we can always redirect. And so I'll say I'm not overly concerned right now, because first things first. And so we're focused on basic requirements and best management practices, and I think we see that as more of an advanced requirement.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. I'll give you a breather and ask Leighton to repeat. They were asked a question and they kind of put some responses in our shared notes, but I'd love to hear it answered live. The question was, sorry, my cat. Is RosaP only, okay, go ahead, Leighton.
No, go ahead, finish reading the question. I'm sorry, I was waving to your cat.
Is RosaP only for data, and is it for all DOT funded data? Is it a must use for extramural researchers or just for internal? When would a researcher use RosaP versus a local data IR or one of the DOT suggested repositories?
Sure. So RosaP is not only for data. It holds reports. It'll hold my slides eventually from this presentation. It holds all sorts of things, which is part of the reason also we don't do data visualization through RosaP. It's a repository. It's an archive. It is not a toy. It is not a place to see pretty pictures or anything like that. Yes, it is intended for all DOT-funded data that has been anonymized and made public and doesn't contain sensitive information, and comes from research. So it has to be research related, and needs to be something you can share in the public. It's not, we're not set up for secure or sensitive. However, the public access plan says that researchers have options. They can send their data to DOT. They can put it in their local institutional repository. They can self-disseminate. They can keep it themselves. They can self-preserve. That part was written before I started in 2016, so I'm not responsible for that. And I actually made sure that in the upcoming draft, it says specifically self-dissemination is no longer acceptable. It must go in a repository, and you must ask us in the proposal to fund that, because we'll fund 5 years of data storage. So that's going to end. So you could use RosaP and your local repository. That's the point of RosaP. RosaP is your report goes in your local website, your university's repository, and RosaP, because DOT has to have a copy. We funded it, we get a copy. It's in the law, it's in our policy that DOT gets a non-exclusive copyright to anything that we fund. So we have to have a copy. I want local copies of all data that's produced. However, there's really cool projects like the 100-car naturalistic driving study at Virginia Tech, where they have a secure room for terabytes of video of people driving their cars, which is highly secure, highly sensitive, and we don't have the infrastructure for that at DOT. And so Virginia Tech stores that, and that's great. I want to partner with everybody. There is no specific, domain-specific transportation repository in the United States, and there never will be, because that ship has sailed. There's already probably 60 or 100 repositories in the United States that hold some sort of data about transportation. I want to work with you all so that I can put an index record in RosaP that points to where you're storing our data, but we may not hold it all. That's my goal, and that's how we're trying to do that.
Thanks, Leighton. I was going to ask another question, but Ashley, I was wondering if you could repeat your chat comment and maybe elaborate a little further.
Yeah, I really like Leighton, that you mentioned having a non-exclusive license and requiring a copy of the work first. This is something that we have lightly considered and started discussing from a legal perspective, really as a solution to a lot of our open access woes. So talking more about the publications and the reporting, which I think you could scale to data. But yeah, but we don't have that now. And I think, yeah, and it's interesting because I think other funders have started talking about it too, and it really depends if so we're a private funder. If you're more of a national funder and it's written into law, that's much more effective. We don't want to be too heavy-handed, but I feel like that would help protect a lot of the knowledge and information that's generated from our grant funding from being, consumed and under a copyright that won't allow for reuse or further its impact. But a lot of funders are also kind of very wary of having too restrictive of licenses because we're afraid that'll scare off grantees.
Exactly. And, one of the things that we've learned is that our language about our non-exclusive right it's in our public access policy. It's in the grant language. It's in the contracts. Somebody who does research is bad at reading contracts. Yeah. And all of you researchers yes. out there, raise your hand because you're all bad at it. I'm sorry, but we're all bad at it because they're printed in all caps or tiny.
We're not lawyers,
We're not lawyers. Yeah. We have lawyers who do that, who are good at that. And that's what we send that stuff. So, but it's in there. I promise you it's in there. And so you have to keep that in mind. Don't sign away DOT's right to the research that you produce that we fund, because when you go to publish in a scholarly journal, because we paid for it and we have a right to it. It's on the public side. Remember who's paying for your research. If you're getting it from money from us, the public, they own it. They own the right to it. And you have to get out of the mindset that this is my research, my data, my precious. No. Somebody else funded that so that you could do the work, and you have to share it back with them. That's what public access and open science is all about.
Oh my gosh. And on that wonderful note, I unfortunately have to wrap us up. Like I said, we didn't have time for our activities, so I hope you all breathe a sigh of relief. You don't have to go into breakout rooms, but
I did sweat a little bit at that. Yes.
Please join me in thanking our speakers for 3 wonderful presentations. We will share the recording as soon as it's available. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We just had too much fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, folks.
Bye.